Hi, good morning, everybody. Good morning, good morning. If you are watching live, it is Tuesday, July 14th. Happy Bastille Day to the French among us. Happy birthday to my brother-in-law, Kevin. So good to be here with you. I am Erin Carrera. You're watching the Modern Oracle on 1-2 Radio here on YouTube. And today, because it is the second Tuesday of the month, we are talking love and relationship. De l'aube, l'amore, l'amour. So today I wanted to talk about something a little opposite of what I've been seeing online, on socials, out in the ethers. Although last night, after I had started brainstorming about this topic last night, I started seeing evidence of this everywhere, and I'll get to that. But I thought it would be really fun today to talk about when it comes to relationships. Who brings out the best in you? And I say that that's a little counter to what I've been hearing on socials. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I love me some good old, complainy algorithm stuff. I do. But I keep hearing about everything that's wrong all the time in relationships. And I am certainly no longer one for fantasy, but I also feel like it is so easy to wallow, so easy to focus on everything bad, everything wrong with whatever, whomever it is that you happen to want to get into relationship with. And I wanted to bring up why we get into relationships in the first place. I mean, there are a million reasons why, right? So many reasons why. Some of us get into relationships because we are romantical Pisces. If you were watching Mark's show yesterday about Mars, and he was talking about Pisces and how Pisces are the diehard romantics. And even he said something like, until they learn that the life isn't always romantic. And I was like, what? I learned that one the hard way. But yes, diehard romantic over here, despite myself. And I know that there's a lot of myth around romance and relationships, but I think some of that myth comes from a kernel of truth and, more importantly, possibility. And I also feel like the other reasons we get into relationships, people like, right, you get into relationships because you fall in love, maybe because you want to get married, maybe because you want financial security, maybe because you want adventure. It depends on the person, you and the partner, because you want to have kids, because you want a companion, because all manner of reasons, right? Because it's expected of you in your culture, in your society, um, because you like the person, etc. Ideally, I feel like amazing relationships help us become more of who we are and the best versions of ourselves. I'm not talking about the best version of ourselves every day. You could ask my husband if you want. He'll tell you, But relationships invite us to become more fully ourselves, right? And so, like I mentioned, on social media, on the internet, I see a lot of content. And then, of course, the algorithm wants to just keep pushing that content about, everything wrong with relationships, or everything wrong with one gender or the other, or all of the ways that we're supposed to manipulate or hack a relationship to serve us. Or, I'm thinking everything from, it's all out there, and that's whatever, fine. But today, we're talking about relationships that invite us to become more fully ourselves. And it's interesting because last night I was at an event, and I had been thinking about this all day. And I went to this event where there were 150 people, primarily older people. By older, I mean, because it's all relative, right? To my nieces and nephews, I'm older. To myself, I'm older. But primarily people in their 70s, maybe some in their 60s, 70s, 80s. And I was with some friends of mine who are a relatively newlywed couple, and they are in their mid 80s, and they're just adorable, and they're so in love. And this is, obviously not their first romance, but they are so adorable in how deeply they love and respect each other, and how much they're a unit and a team. And the older couple were telling me about how they met and how their story came to be. And I just kept thinking, this is exactly what the show is about for the Modern Oracle on Tuesday. These two people met, and neither of them wanted to get married again. Neither of them were necessarily looking for partnership, but they met, and being together makes their lives better, brings out something better in them individually. And then I was thinking about recently, a friend of mine asked me, out of all of the different romances that I've had in my life, and I've had a lot of romances, Pisces, you know, I've been around the block, I guess we could say, and I've had plenty of interesting people in my life. And my friend said, "What is it that made you finally say yes to Carlo? Like, what about Carlo? That's my husband. Made you say yes to him, but not some of these others?" And I said, quite honestly, because I believed in the life that we could build together. That's really, it's not because he's so darn cute, although he is. It's not because he's Italian, although that doesn't hurt. Right? Like, there's all these things about him that are wonderful, but the real reason is because we share a vision for our lives, and we ultimately really do help the other person become more themselves and bring out the best in each other. So now we're not going to be talking about my life because I want this to be for you all. But it's important, whether you're in a relationship and you want to get out of that relationship, or you're in a relationship and you want to improve it, or you're in a relationship and you want to celebrate it because it's so great, or you want to get into a relationship, you just got out of one, you want to get into a new one, or when you eventually want to get into one, or you don't ever want to be in a relationship, but this could be still wonderful to think about in other ways anyway, because you don't necessarily have to be in a long-term relationship for this to apply to you. I think it's a wonderful guide in general for our relationships, whether those are romantic, friendly, business, wherever we have choice. Let's put it that way, because you can't necessarily pick, who your uncles are, but you can cultivate relationships on purpose if you choose to. So my question to you is, who brings out the best in you? I bet for most of you, something comes to mind, someone. If you are fortunate, or if you've been working on it, maybe it may be your partner, or it might be a teacher that you loved, or a friend that you loved, right? The next question we could ask around that is, like, how do you know what is the best, right? How do you know? And how can you actually apply this in your life? I saw this great social media post the other day about the difference between, I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was. I don't even know who it was. It just like kind of flew by, and I paused and I saw, they said, are you actually healing, or have you been learning about healing? Which is a great question, because I can tell you it is so easy for people to read all the books and watch all the YouTube videos and listen to all the podcasts and even go on retreats. But until you are actually putting what you have been learning about into practice, until the rubber hits the road, you're learning about it, right? It's like you're in school for healing. That's not always true. I mean, I don't, sometimes acknowledging, and when you're reading the books and you're learning, I'm not saying you're not also doing the healing, but it is easy to fall into a trap of just learning about healing and not actually doing the healing. And I think the same thing goes with relationships. It's easy to fall into a trap of learning about all of the right language, right? Attachment theory, love languages, but not necessarily actually put that into practice. So there are so many different answers, because it's going to be so individual as to who brings out the best in you and how do you know what is the best in you. But I'm going to give a couple of examples based on sort of most of the people I speak with over on Want to Listen, and a sort of general pattern I see in a lot of the people that I work with. The first example I'm going to say is people pleasers, right? I work with a lot of people pleasers, or a lot of people who have just learned to center others. And of course, there are times to center others. If you're a parent, you know full well you are going to center those children. That is in my opinion, the right thing to do. It's the good and proper thing to do because they need that, right? They can't survive without you centering them, or finding a way to have them be centered somehow. But there are times where you really do need to not overly give of yourself, particularly to a partner. And I work with a lot of people who are codependent or people pleasers and often cater to the person in front of them to keep the relationship going. And then they grow over time exhausted and tired, and there's just no more to give. And they may start to become resentful or bitter. And this is often where relationships start to go south, and one party may not even know it because they've just been enjoying the relationship all along because the other party has just been taking care of business. So, an example of what somebody bringing out the best in you is, it may not be that their fault, so to speak, that you are catering to them, that you have been centering them, that you are always taking care of them. But somebody who's willing to bring out the best in you, if you begin to change your behavior and center yourself or ask for things to become more equitable, that they are willing to work with you. And it will be very hard. It will be hard for you as well as for them. And yet it is totally possible, because I know many people who have centered the other person for so long that they can swear, like going on a diet, okay, I'm going to start centering myself. And then you just find yourself back in the same old pattern, right? But at the same time, people who really, truly are your people, they are like your person. Those who are really going to be solid figures in your life, they will want what's best for you, right? Okay, the healthiest relationships. And that's what I mean by best, because it's going to be, best is sort of one of those terms where it's like, well, how are we defining relationships? Again, right? Like I mentioned at the very beginning, like there's so many different reasons why people get married or get partnered or get into a relationship or start dating somebody. And I remember years ago, I had someone in my life who was married because, and this is what she told me, this is not like gossip, because of the financial security. And she had a contract with her spouse, and it dictated things like how much she could weigh and how much allowance she got every month. And if she weighed a certain amount or within the parameters, then she would get this allowance. But if she ever went over that number, I don't know if there was an allowance for under that number, but if she ever went over that number, then the allowance would be less. And I remember when she told me that, I was horrified, because I'm like just such a small town Midwestern girl at heart, right? Like I was just like, what? Like, and you don't want to punch this person in the face every day for putting that in your marital contract? What? But then I realized I was being, coming from my point of view. I don't want to say closed-minded, because I stand by the idea that like that's whack. But like, listen to my old school language. That was really messed up, in my opinion. But that's what worked for them, and that's what they wanted, and that's what she was looking for, apparently, or that's what she was saying she was looking for and willing to take, I suppose. That's another way of looking at it. By the way, I really liked her spouse a lot. I thought actually, I really, really liked him. I thought he was a wonderful person. So when I learned that information, I was just like, like that would not work for me. If that works for you. Now listen, I don't think that was an example of the healthiest relationship or the best relationship. I'm not inside that relationship, so I don't really know all the details. Wouldn't work for me. But I would say the healthiest relationships, they're not asking us to become someone else or to stay something we once were when we met forever. They really, really, really invite us to become more fully ourselves. I have so many like crazy stories I've heard or been a part of when it comes to this idea, right? So many people I know present a version of themselves. I mean, almost everyone does this, right? When you first meet someone, of course you're putting your best foot forward. Of course you always look amazing, and you are always, your funniest self, your wittiest self, your kindest self, your sexiest self, whatever, to make that person fall in love with you, right? So many people call me the minute they've been doing that and the other person's been doing that, and all of a sudden that other person doesn't, like, this is a phone call I get so often. I don't know what happened. It was going so great, and we were talking every day and going out all the time. Then all of a sudden, like, just nothing. Did I do something wrong? And the answer is usually no, you didn't do anything wrong. That person was presenting the best version of themselves while they were deciding whether or not you were the one. And then they realized for themselves, you are not the one. But now you are hooked because of that incredible love bombing, ultimately, is what it was, right? But this presentation of Dreamland Honeymoon, and you have been taught to internalize this, whether that's through culture, indoctrination, your own childhood, previous relationships, whatever. So you think that if you can just be different, then it'll go back to this wonderful way it was. And I'm telling you, it won't work. I've seen it too many times. It won't work. This person has already decided you're not the one. You're better off just moving on, honestly. Because if they are the one, they'll come around again anyway. And you won't have to, put on the show. But this is something that happens to so many people. And it's not gendered, by the way. I've had so many people of all genders call me to talk about this. I've met so many people who have done this. I had a boyfriend who did this to me. He was amazing. And then all of a sudden, he just like disappeared. He was ghosting me. And I am, of course, psychotic. So I wouldn't accept that. And so I just sort of insisted on making him tell me, this was so long ago, I can't believe I did this, making him tell me why. And he had, like, poor guy, he just looked like he was, like in a cop show where the cops have like the spotlight on the criminal and they're interrogating him. And he just was squirming. The poor guy did not want to hurt my feelings. He didn't want to be a bad guy, but I needed him to tell me. And he was finally just, well, you're just a little too much for me, which was true. I was. One could also say he wasn't enough. And by that, we mean my energy was just over here and his energy was like more over here. It just wasn't a match. But I was really into him because I had oxytocinally bonded early. And, I was just, and he was a real doll. He was a real cutie pie. And then I said something like, what does that mean? Even though he was right. Really, in retrospect, I'm really grateful. He told me the truth. And he was like, well, you're just not the one. And I was like, well, how would you know? How will you know when you meet the one? Which I think is actually a fair question. It's a question I could also have looked in the mirror when I was asking, but I asked him. And in a way, he was the mirror, wasn't he? So I kind of was looking in the mirror, mirror on the wall. And he said, well, I'll just know because I will just become the better man version of myself. And I will want to be the better man. Now, at the time, I think I rolled my eyes so hard they hit the ceiling. Because there's a lot of unicorn theory in there, right? Oh, this magical person will just appear and I will just be naturally, magically the perfect fit, romantically, emotionally, mercurially, intellectually, culturally, politically, religiously, sexually, right? We will just naturally be, this is our dream of a soulmate, naturally, immediately perfect. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen or that can't happen. But eventually, probably, there will be something, right? There will be something. But at the time, I thought, this guy's an idiot. And it ain't good enough for me. Moving on. Looking back, with time comes wisdom, right? I think I better understand what he intended. I don't disagree that he may have had a little unicorn theory going on, a little unicorn fantasy going on. But I also feel that I didn't bring out the best in him the way he needed somebody to bring out the best in him. When he was around me, he felt overwhelmed and he felt under ambitious, which is true. I am 50 times more ambitious than he is. I cannot pretend otherwise. And for some people, that would be totally fine. That wouldn't be a deal breaker for a lot of people. But for him, it made him uncomfortable. Also, maybe the fact that I had some expectations that he should come with me and join my energy train ride, which is really more of a jet ride. Like I at the time I did. Now I don't think it would be as big a deal because I've grown, but also it's how that was, what that was. Looking back, I am so grateful, and I learned so much from that experience and from that conversation. Because now when I think about what I see in relationships, long-term relationships, I study very long-term relationships when I meet people, and short-term too. But like my parents have been married for 50 some years, 52. And they've been together even longer because they met when they were 17 and 19. And I studied my brother and my sister. They're both in 25 and 15-year relationships, right? And I ask especially friends of ours who are in, say, 30, 40-year relationships, the good, the bad, the ugly. I want to know it all. I want to know it all because every relationship story is going to have its own series of events. And what I notice is that over time, it's this interesting blend of long-term relationships that work. You can feel comfortable being totally yourself. You don't have to be walking around on eggshells. You get to just be who you are, and they get to be just who they are. And yet at the same time, with respect for the fact that you're living with another person or you are engaging with another person. And so you are also thoughtful of their experience of you, and they are thoughtful of your experience of them. So that you never have to like fake or pretend to be something you're not to keep them, but you also have a respect for the relationship and for their experience in the relationship and for your own experience. It sounds so basic when I say it, and yet, right? It sometimes is so hard to remember, especially when we start talking about long-term relationships where it is inequitable, where somebody is doing all or the primary or much more of the emotional labor, the home labor, or whatever kind of labor that may be, where somebody is being taken for granted and the other person is unaware. And those habits can take time to change. And so that kind of resentment can build. And that's when you may withdraw from your partner. And that's when that piece that I mentioned of caring for the other person's experience in the relationship may go away, right? I was really trying to cover just one topic, which was who brings out the best in you. And it's impossible for it to not go into 8,000 million other topics, right? So I want to make a distinction between somebody is bringing out the best in me and I perform the best for them. And that is why I had this whole introduction about relationships, because what my ex-boyfriend was wrong about, he was wrong because a relationship will not magically transform you. It will not magically transform you into a better man, right? It will create the conditions in which you are confronted with yourself. And then you will have the opportunity to decide whether or not you grow and how you grow. So that relationship with that boyfriend, for example, I actually really grew a lot. So I do remain grateful because I really saw how much my energy, out of my need and fear of losing him and disappointment that it didn't work out, my energy just really tried to override him. And I'll tell you, I hadn't really, if I have ever done that before him, I'm not aware of doing that before him, but I'm not saying that I didn't. I'm just saying I'm not aware that I did that. But I've got a lot of energy and I can certainly steamroll. I don't prefer to and I don't want to. And of course it's never going to work. It's like when you watch those 90s movies and they do like a witchcraft spell to get somebody to love them. I'm thinking of is it Witches of no, Practical Magic? Practical Magic. But it goes horribly wrong. Or like the movie Obsession, right? Obsession is basically the same take on, I mean, it's a great movie. And it's definitely of the 2026 era, but it's the same idea as practical magic, right? The spell works, and it works too well in all of these ways that with all these unintended consequences you really hadn't planned on. Uh-oh, whoopsie. So there's a huge difference. When you first meet somebody and you're getting into a relationship, of course there's going to be a certain amount of performing and auditioning, so to speak, right? I mean, every relationship I've ever gotten into in the very beginning, of course, as I mentioned before, I was my very best self. But I think by the time I met my now husband, I was pretty good at saying like what Alain de Botton, the philosopher, says, like, here are the ways I'm pretty crazy. What are the ways that you're pretty crazy? Do our crazies match? Because I had done so much deconstruction work around myself and love relationships. And I had spent so much time really with guys, with men. That's who I was dating at the time. But also because I was in bands, right? So I had spent so much time with guys that I kind of also, I got that, I got it, like I understood that I just decided I wasn't going to care. I was going to care if somebody merited my care, but I was done with unrequited love. Years later, I have a different opinion about it. But at the time, I was like, I'm over unrequited love. I'm over wanting somebody who doesn't want me. I still think that's great. I'm over any of that stuff. Just if I meet somebody I like, I don't care how old they are. I just decided this is what I was saying. I don't care like about I'm not going to have rules about age or appearance or gender or like work or any of that. It's just if I meet somebody, if I like them, and if they ask me out, I'll go on a date. And if the date is fun and they ask me out on another date, I'll go on another date. I just sort of decided to stop pushing, stop pursuing, stop looking, stop the insanity. That's old school. Stop. I just kind of decided to stop. And what I was really doing was I was surrendering, right? I was done trying to control, done trying to dictate, done trying to force things that weren't really quite right. And in that spiritual surrender, I was able to just really be free and liberated. And I started meeting people. I did have another role, by the way. I had to be attracted to them. I had to like them, but I had to be attracted to them because previously I also had let myself get talked into a lot of relationships with people that I know this sounds weird, but I kind of felt bad for. So I would go on a date because I felt bad for them. And then I would end up in like, 8-month relationships that I didn't want to be in because I couldn't say no. It was this other weird aspect of my personality when I was much younger. And so I just, so I really, it wasn't that I was going to go out with just anybody. It had to be somebody I was actually interested in. But I wasn't going to put anything on it. Right. And I remember that summer, it was 2012. I met a few people that I was like, oh. And then whereas in my past, I would have gone like, who is that? I'm going to charm them. I'm going to attract them. I'm going to have them. I must have them. Instead, I was just like, I watched myself. I observed myself. And then I went, okay, we'll just see what happens. And eventually, one of them sort of emerged as somebody who was interested in me. And eventually, we started chatting and spending time together. And eventually, we got into a relationship, and eventually, we got married. And what I'm not mentioning is all of the ways that I really had to grow spiritually and in terms of relationship skills and psychologically because I would watch my habit. I would watch the habit of wanting to control or wanting to demand or wanting to ensure. And I just could see how that would just simply push someone away. It would make it go wrong, or at least not be organic. And I thought, what if I just keep going with this experiment? I'm actually still doing that. Like, what if I just keep going? I'm totally married. What if I just keep seeing what happens every day? Let's just see what happens today. It's not that I'm always perfect at doing that. It's that I constantly catch myself being like, I want this to be this way and this to be that way. And there's nothing wrong with making a request. But it's more of this thing of like, let's just see what happens if I do this in a loving way. This is somebody bringing out the best in me. I'm not having to perform spirituality. I'm having to actually grow through some of the discomfort. I'm not having to perform, well, all these years later, 14 years in, I don't have to necessarily perform a lot, but, things that we perform. Now, I am a performer. I enjoy performing, but it should be a choice, not a must have, right? So it's like, I don't have to perform. And this is what I wish for all of you who are looking for this kind of relationship, a relationship that grows you, that brings out the best in you, right? Relationships that nourish you and grow you, they are with people who respect you, people who are honest with you, people who are willing to hear you out, willing to hold space for you, willing to build trust and take the time it takes to build trust. People who are really willing to be themselves with you so that when you get triggered, because you will, or when they get triggered, because they will, when something happens that makes them go like, wait, what? Why do you always leave dishes in the sink? Or you animal? Or why are you always blah blah blah, whatever, every couple has theirs, big and small. You can lovingly challenge and they can stay with you, right? They can stay with you. So how, when you are meeting somebody, how will you know that this might be somebody who can bring the best out in you? I really think this is the rubber hitting the road part of the conversation, right? First of all, is somebody curious about you? I think in the beginning of a relationship, I think it is so much more important that somebody is curious about you rather than certain about you. I know we love when we hear these conversations about like, well, I just looked across the room and then I knew that was the one. I think a lot of the times that's a dangerous conversation. I'm going to tell you, I've looked across the room and I've seen the one a lot. And I was certain. I only married one of them. Thank God. And but I think about that when Harry met Sally, all of those conversations those couples are having. And they're like these little old couples. And they're saying, like, well, I walked into the dance hall and I saw this beautiful girl and I looked at my friend and I said, do you see that girl, Murray? That's the girl I'm going to marry. And it's kind of like, there's a way that's romantic and there's a way that's just deeply misinformed. I mean, and I say that because we're talking about couples who met in the 1930s, back before women could even have credit cards. So, different conversation. In today's day and age, am I saying that you can't fall in love instantly? I have. So, I'm not saying that. Am I saying it can't work out? No, I'm sure it can. I'm sure it can. But amongst all that certainty, do you know anything about them? Stay curious, right? People who are curious about you will have room for when you revise yourself, room for when you grow, room for when you change. And then the beauty is staying curious, right? 50 years in, staying curious about your partner. Somebody who isn't weaponizing an old version of yourself against the current version of yourself. So somebody, when you're in a relationship, somebody, how do you know somebody who is bringing out the best in you? One of their characteristics, I think this is important for both people as a practice, is to be able to be disappointed in you without annihilating your character. This is a big one for relationships. This is where a lot of people begin habits that can really destroy a relationship, because you will be disappointed in each other. You will be. I cannot tell you how many times I have accidentally left the burner on. I'm really sorry. I really am. It is one of my work. I know you, this is not a comedy bit. I, I'm, we have a little sign above the back door. Our kitchen has a back door. And on the back door of the kitchen, we have a little sign that says, "Are the burners off?" That's for me. And sometimes my husband will come home and the burner is on. And he is so disappointed. And for those of you who know why he's disappointed, you're probably shocked and clutching your pearls, rightfully so, because that burner could start a fire and burn down the whole building. It could be bad. It could be bad. Now, I'm much better about it now than I was years ago, but because of that sign, thank God, but I can learn, I can grow. But he was disappointed in me, but he didn't assassinate my character because of it. Yes, I was forgetful about that, but he didn't make that into "you're a terrible person who doesn't care about me and doesn't listen to me, because if you would listen to me, this quirk of yours, you would have changed right away." It took me a little while. I did. So here's another one. For either of you, you can admit that you are wrong. Somebody who can admit and say, like, can you say to your partner, "I was wrong," without feeling like you are completely surrendering all of your power to them? And this is something important for either party on a personal level, because sometimes you are wrong. Can you admit you are wrong? And sometimes when we are in a relationship that is unhealthy, we can't admit we're wrong, because when we do, we're just giving away more of our healthy amount of power. But in a healthy relationship, ideally, we can admit when we are wrong and not have to admit we are wrong when we are not. This is what I mean. If you are actually wrong, you should be able to admit that. If you're not wrong, and I don't mean like you're pretending not to be wrong so that you can get away with things. I mean, I certainly once was in a relationship with somebody who would force me to admit that I was wrong about things that I was not wrong about. That was a very unhealthy relationship. Okay? You can bring them good news without having to minimize it, right? They are happy for you and your wins and your successes. These are all different ways that people can bring out the best in you. And so many of these traits, these are the traits that make for a great partner, but these are also traits that it takes time to see. It takes time to observe and witness in another person. And the good news is, these are traits that you can develop in yourself. These are traits that if you recognize, oh gosh, I actually sometimes, I don't allow them to bring me good news without needing them to minimize it or also aggrandize me. Or, oh gosh, whenever they do leave dishes in the sink, I do totally annihilate their whole character, right? You can change this. You can change those patterns in yourself. You can change that neurological patterning. You can work on new thoughts and new beliefs on a way to be. And you can learn to surrender the ego aspect that is preventing you from having a great relationship. That's not today's episode. We will talk about that in a future love and relationship episode. I just want to say that patterns can be very hard to break, right? Because a pattern, look, your brain is a prediction machine. That is what it does. Familiarity, it's not necessarily about feeling good, but about feeling regular, predictable, right? And that is because of safety, right? Sudden flood, In our DNA, danger, death. Sudden famine, danger, death. Predictable, eating 3 meals a day, this person always behaving this way, good. Therefore, that's how patterns become difficult to break. If I know the choreography here, he withdraws, I chase. I withdraw, she chases, whatever. She criticizes, I defend. They need, I rescue, right? If this is the pattern, then we have these roles and we get into these patterns. Whereas getting into a healthy relationship or working to shift yours into a healthy relationship, that often does require creating a new habit or a new pattern. And so that can be a little, I think the word is disorienting, right? It can be a little disorienting. But this is how you can develop and cultivate that deeper connection, right? So, deep intimacy, which I think is what we really, really, truly come to relationships for. To see, to be seen, to feel held, and to hold. This is obviously, we know by now, and yet I think we need to say it out loud because we secretly don't really know this. Deep intimacy and healthy intimate relationships are not about never triggering each other. Then that's just performative. It is about a capacity to return to this other person even after my ego got triggered. I got defensive there. Let me drop that. I'm dropping the fight now. I'm dropping that. I'm going to stay here and be a whole person, even if I'm angry with you. I'm going to still stay here with you and remain whole with you. I'm going to stay in contact with you and stay in contact with love, even while we're working through a problem. Okay? That's the good stuff. I'm telling you, it is so hard in the moment when you're in that middle of, oh, you just want to let it rip. If you can stay with your heart, you're angry, but you love them. You stay with your heart and you share your feelings. And then you let them share their feelings and you actually listen. No, not that. And then you share back. Now we have two people in deep intimacy, in a loving, caring relationship, even if they're angry with each other, even if they've been triggered, even if they're disappointed in each other, even if they're delivering difficult news. Right? So who brings out the best in you? What is the best? What is the best? Yeah, sure. It is also fun to flirt and feel the high of that initial falling in love and the limerence of it all. That is fun. And then comes the real love. The real love, not just the charming, not just the initial honeymoon. You can still perform those things for each other. You can still bring those things back in if you want. You can choose to do that with each other. But I really feel that bringing out the best in you is this deep ability to stay right here, and still love, and still choose love. Okay, so I, of course, wrote 30 different pages all about this, but I'm going to leave you with a practice on how do I know or who is bringing out the best in me and what to do with this, right? Okay, so we're going to do a 3-person relationship inventory. I want you to just choose 3 people in your life. It's going to be number 1, someone that you love. Number 2, someone who triggers you. That might be the same person. Number 3, someone around whom you feel most like yourself. I can instantly say all 3 of those can be one person, but I do suggest 3 different people. But the minute I wrote this the other day, and now the minute I'm looking at that, I'm like, well, that just sounds like my husband. And vice versa, right? Vice versa. So Number 1, someone you love. Number 2, someone who triggers you. Number 3, someone around whom you feel most like yourself. If I were to pick someone who triggers me in extreme, it wouldn't be my hubby, it would be somebody else. Okay. For each person, you're going to ask a series of questions. Number 1, who do I become around this person? Who do I become around this person? Right? Isn't it so interesting? I'm watching this, like, who do I become around my parents? You know, who do I become around my best childhood friend or my long time friends? Who do I become around people I've just met, right? So when you're talking about someone you love, someone who triggers you, and someone who you feel most like yourself around, who do you become? What is it that makes you feel most yourself? What is that? Do you feel safe? Do you feel held? Do you feel seen? What parts of you get louder? And what parts of you get quieter? And what are the things that you practice in that relationship? And I'm telling you, you are practicing things in those relationships. You might be practicing honesty, or you might be practicing lying. You might be practicing performative behaviors. You might be practicing defensiveness. You might be practicing caretaking. You might be practicing courage. You might be practicing thoughtful exchange. You might be practicing play and flirtation and fun. Okay? Then I want you to ask of each person this question: is this person bringing something out of me, or am I bringing an old self into the room before they even get a chance? Right? And it might be a little bit of both. Have you ever had that friend or person in your life where you got an intention of how you're going to enter the room, and then there they are, and then it just goes differently than how you expected? It goes differently better, sometimes differently worse, right? But sometimes differently better. Those of us who are imaginative fantasizers probably go through this a lot, where we have an idea of how things are going to go. And if you're me, you've probably envisioned the scenario 15 times. And then you actually walk into the room and it's totally different than how you expected. Is this person bringing out something wonderful or different? And why? Right? Because sometimes it will be a little bit about you and your emotional tools and your emotional skills anyway. And then finally, okay, the next time I'm with this person, what is the quality I want to practice the next time I'm with them? Not what do I want them to do, but what do I want to practice? I think this is really beautiful. If you are in a long-term relationship, you might practice all manner of things, such as be more present, listen more, turn the burners off, double check the burners. For 1 week, I'm going to practice checking the burners before I leave the house. That's what I did. That's how I fixed that problem. Maybe you might need to decenter them. Maybe you need to decenter them a little bit and not make them the center of your universe. Maybe that's what you need to practice, right? Because I feel that ultimately these relationships that bring out the best in us, the people who bring out the best in us, it might be because of them, but it's also going to be because of us. So people who bring out the best in us, it's not necessarily because, oh, like my ex-boyfriend said, I'll just magically do that. Or what I think he meant, which is it'll be somebody where I want to give in that way because I'll feel safe to do so. These are people who make it safe for you to choose to be the better version of yourself. They make it safe for you. They create space for you to do that. And ideally, you do the same for them. All right. So, listen, you've come to the end of another episode of The Modern Oracle with me, your host, Erin Carrera. It is, if you are listening live, it is Tuesday, July 14th. And from 10 a.m. until 11 a.m. I will be available at one2listen.com/Erin. That is Erin with an E, at a reduced rate. In fact, I believe we are having reduced rates in general for the new moon today. But you can come find me, or you can just come find me anytime this week. 1-2-listen. That's like 1-2, like 12, number 12. 12listen.com/Erin, ERIN. I'd love to talk with you. You can find me on TikTok. You can find me on Instagram at 1-2-listen-Erin. And until next week, thank you so much for coming. Bye.